Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to AIPAD Talks. I am Andra Russick of Scheinbaum and Russick in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the chair of the AIPAD Education Committee. As part of our education program, we are pleased to present AIPAD Talks. These talks bring together prominent curators, artists, collectors, and writers to discuss thought-provoking ideas, new trends, and unique processes involved in the medium of photography. As many of you know, AIPAD is dedicated to creating and maintaining high standards in the business of exhibiting, buying, and selling photographic art. We're thrilled to announce that in April 2024, the photography show will once again be held at the Park Avenue Armory. This is an exciting return for the show, and we hope that all of you will be able to join us in New York in the spring. I want to let all of you know that this talk will be recorded and it will be available on the AIPAD website, where you can also find previous talks that we have done, including the talks from our last photography show. Our speaker today is Paul Martineau, Curator of Photographs at the J. Paul Getty Museum. Paul is a leading curator in the field of fine art photography. He received a BA in art from the University of Massachusetts at Boston and an MA in art history from Williams College. Before joining the Getty Museum in 2003, he held positions at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and at the Sterling and Francine Clark Art Institute. Paul has organized numerous exhibitions at the Getty, covering a diverse range of topics spanning the birth of the medium to today. He is the author and co-author of more than a dozen books and articles, including Imogen Cunningham, a Retrospective, Icons of Style, A Century of Fashion Photography, and Robert Mapplethorpe, The Photographs. Paul will be talking to us today about Rodney Smith, a distinguished New York-based fashion photographer. Paul will unveil the intriguing narrative behind the creation of the latest publication, Rodney Smith, A Leap of Faith. We look forward to an exciting and informative talk. At the end of the talk, we'll have a Q&A. I'd like you all to add your questions to the chat if you have them, and I will then read them to Paul, who will then answer them. And we will try to get through as many questions as we can during this session. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Paul Martineau. Paul?
Thank you very much, Andra. And to all the folks at AIPAD Talks, I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my story with the audience today. Let's begin by sharing my screen. I think I have to be enabled, Andra.
Let me see. I'm sorry, everyone. Just give me a moment. We missed that one part. Okay, try it now, Paul. Go ahead.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. So one of the things I wanted to talk about in the beginning was how I became familiar with Smith and how I came to do this project for the Smith estate. It was quite different from the way I normally approach projects, because I was invited by the estate and the widow of the estate, named Leslie Simolan, to investigate Smith's career and to brainstorm with her about creating a new publication. And this is the beautiful publication in question. The first thing I did was to do some research to find out what had been done in the past and what I thought was necessary. And we both agreed that we needed a book that would be a retrospective of Smith's work that would be accessible both to the general audience as well as to the museum professional. So I undertook this project during COVID, at least the research end of it, the research and writing end. And I wasn't able to travel to Smith's archive in New York, but they were so well organized that it was easy for me to gather the material. It had everything digitized, and that was from all the prints to lots of research material. So that was really great. A lot of times artist archives are terribly disorganized, but that was not the case here at all. So it really made my work much easier. And then when we finally mapped out what the book would be, I based it on a book that I had done on Imogen Cunningham in the past. And I wanted it to have a main essay that I would write. And I also wanted it to have contributions from others. So we got Rebecca Semp from the CCP, the Center for Creative Photography, to write an essay on the technical and part of Smith's career. So there'd be a diversity of voices within the book. And the book is chronological, so it starts off with Smith's earliest work. And this was one that was done during his graduate studies. Just to give you a little bit of background, he was born in 1947 to wealthy Jewish parents on Long Island. And his parents were somewhat critical of him. His mother was concerned with appearances, and his father was very stern. He operated several fashion businesses, including Anne Klein. And Smith felt like he couldn't measure up to their expectations. And he attended University of Virginia, which was his father's alma mater. And he took English and religious studies rather than business, like his father might have hoped, and started to think about the camera as a means of personal expression. When he was a young boy and his parents were away on vacations, they left him and his sister with the German caretakers. And they were amateur photographers and taught him darkroom photography. So it was something that he really loved from a young age. And then in 1967, he visited New York City and went to MoMA and saw an exhibition of works by Henri Cartier-Bresson, Dorothea Lange, Paul Strand, and fell in love with that exhibition and realized that this is something that he could do. So it was one of the revelatory moments for Smith. This picture was made in 1971, before he had finished his graduate degree, which was at Yale. He was in the divinity school and he received a Master of Divinity in 1973. But this picture is important because it represents the first picture that he felt represented his own work, and that it was perfect. And he spent a lot of time printing it and reprinting it to get the print just right. For Smith, it wasn't just the image that was important, but it was the output that was the physical print that was of tantamount importance to him. And part of that training came from his training at Yale with Walker Evans. He was in the divinity school, but he made a special arrangement to spend half of his time in the photography section. This picture is kind of rife with kind of psychological issues that Smith was dealing with at the time. His privileged position as the son of a wealthy man, and he's photographed this doorman in the window whose job it is to keep people out of this expensive apartment building. He doesn't really belong there. He's just there to give a service. So this kind of figures in with with Smith's interest in working class people. And it has this very interesting trajectory where you can see the awning from the outside. There's a reflection in the window. And also these two brass plates, the door handles are like sentinels that are, guarding the door and keeping people out. It was very difficult for Smith to work in the dark room because he was claustrophobic and he had a very small dark room. So while he had the feeling of freedom when he was making his pictures, he felt stressed when he had to do the printing. You'll notice here with some of the early black and white pictures that he's creating using a Leica camera, the connections to the American modernists of the 1920s and 30s, Charles Sheeler and Paul Strand. And Smith liked to say that everything about his pictures was connected to the light, and that was the basis and inspiration for all the work that he did. He spent a lot of time traveling around the United States and a little bit in Europe and Israel, making pictures of people. He would invest in those communities by staying around for several months to really get a sense of the flavor of the people who lived there. And this was one picture that was a favorite of mine. It reminds me of his interest and appreciation of the work of W. Eugene Smith, who has these incredible blacks. And you see this figure emerging from the darkness, and the intimacy of the experience of the camera and how close it is palpable. Smith said that he was interested in getting close. And when he got close, he got even closer. I'm so close that I cannot look the other way or hide behind anything. And this was someone that sometimes had issues with his own self-esteem so that he couldn't look people directly in the eye. So to use the camera to be able to have this intimate relationship with the sitter was really important to Smith. In the mid-'80s, he started photographing CEOs for Heinz Company, and that took him all around the world to make environmental portraits of these executives. And he reshaped corporate portraiture. Instead of just showing these executives in the boardroom sitting at a desk, he has them out and about, showing off the daily routine. This is John Hinch in a cab in London. And then the next example is Luigi Ribola, who's in Italy on his daily constitutional. And when Luigi started walking down the street, Smith noticed that these other gentlemen had their hands clasped behind their backs. So he asked Luigi to do the same and turn around and look at the camera. And he got this great shot. Smith's assistants knew how to say "don't smile" in every language because he felt that the smile was inauthentic in pictures and that he'd get a much better sense of somebody's personality without the smile. Smith had married previously in the late 60s to a woman named Mary Kelly Bush, and they had one son. But in the early 80s, the marriage started to fall apart. and Smith met Leslie Smolin in the late 80s, and she hired him to do some work for her. And she wanted to art direct the shoot, and Rodney rejected all her requests. He just said no. His favorite word was no. And the reason why we think that is because he was reluctant to give up his agency, and he was super keen on creating artistic work. This is a really beautiful picture of Leslie and Rodney's honeymoon, and they're in Siena. And Rodney, who didn't like the way he looked and didn't like to have his picture taken, asked Leslie to stop in the storefront window, which had a mirror in it, and made this picture using his Hasselblad. Beautiful picture. I love how the black line going down the right-hand side of the portrait is kind of framing them both. And you can see from the mirror out onto the street, and there's this wonderful couple that's walking down the road, and the man is looking back to see what's going on. Really romantic and beautiful. Because Smith had gained some renown for his environmental portraits, a number of heritage brands like Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman, and Brooks Brothers decided that he could make fashion pictures for them, particularly men, out in the world. So here we have a picture that was created for Brooks Brothers, and they had come out with a new line of suits that were supposed to fit all different builds, very skinny builds as well as more stocky builds. And this is a place where Smith's injected his own sense of humor and wit. He's sat the stocky gentleman down, and he has the taller gentleman standing back to back. The pictures during this time have a particularly American flair to them. This one was done on the 4th of July, so it includes the American flag. Very soon, art directors for magazines took notice, and one of those people was Dennis Friedman, who was the creative director for W, and he hired Smith to do the men's portfolio, in addition to the magazine that focused on men's fashion. And you have to remember that we're coming out of the 80s, and the 80s was all about power dressing and extravagance and the kind of conspicuous display of wealth. And then during the early 90s, there was a recession and a rejection of that style. People wanted simpler clothes. You can think of this lip dress being more popular. And the perfect location for this kind of a shoot would be the Shaker Village in Hancock, Massachusetts. So you can see on the left, the men's portfolio, and then on the right, one of the pictures from within, and it shows Peter in the cornfield. And this picture resonates with Smith's knowledge of the FSA pictures, the Farm Security Administration pictures that Dorothea Lange and Arthur Rothstein were making during the Great Depression, as well as his interest in painting. I immediately thought of Grant Wood's American Gothic when I saw this, because pose is so full frontal. Smith likes to create these very strong pictures with pyramidal structure. Really beautiful. And then as the 90s went on, there was more money in the budgets for travel. So Smith had an extensive library of books of places that he hoped to shoot one day. So he could recommend places all around the world to people who wanted to hire him to make pictures. The previous men's portfolio was so successful that Dennis Friedman asked the artist to do a reprise. And this one took place at the Parc des Sceaux, which is just outside Paris. And the style of the clothes is retro, almost like it's a combination of maybe a Victorian style clothing, just a little plainer. And then one of the things we have on the right is a picture that Smith made on his own free time after he had completed the shoot for W. He saw one of his assistants coming down the stairs and said, "Oh, before we leave, I have to get a picture." And this is how a lot of fashion photographers make their own work. They're on location, they have models at their and makeup artists and clothing, and so they do their own private work after they've done the commissions. Here we have the surrealism that many people remark about Smith's pictures. On the left, we have Three Men with Shears, which was actually an ad for a champagne house. So the men with shears are suggesting that the champagne house is meticulous about how they grow their grapes and how they harvest them and make the wine. But without the ad in place, it could kind of take on a surreal, slightly frightening specter. One thinks of the work of Magritte, of course, but also the slightly menacing paintings of Giorgio de Chirico. What are these men doing? Are they robots? Are they going to go crazy and kill people with those shears? Those are some of the things that I think about when I look at this picture. And then on the right, we have the absurd. This gentleman who has missed his flight is running down the runway to try and get on the plane, just like one would chase after a bus. And this is very Hitchcockian, in my opinion. It smacks of North by Northwest when Cary Grant is being chased by the crop duster. But look at the composition of this picture. Smith's taking the picture when the hat is aligned with the wheels of the plane as it's taking off. And when both the plane and the model were moving, it mustn't have been easy to capture this precise moment on film. Smith had steadfastly refused to move into color photography for many years, despite advice to do so from all different quarters. And then in 2002, his studio assistant, Patricia Barrett, started experimenting with an Epson SureColor printer. And she convinced Smith that this might be a good idea, and showed him that he could have control over all aspects of the printing, from the choice of the paper to the margins and the size, the brightness, all the same types of things he was used to doing in the wet darkroom in black and white. So he did some experiments in his garage. He set up a studio in the garage and had one of his favorite models there. And these are kind of a homage to the work of Sarah Moon. And he made them out of focus, which is something that he rarely did. He was all about trying to capture very precise and detailed images. So this was a total 360 for him. And one of the things he was concerned about is the fact that people didn't take color photographs very seriously for quite some time. People thought they were just the purview of commercial photographers. So people who were in the old school, like Smith, really felt that if they wanted to be recognized as an artist, that it would be best to start off with black and white. But Smith shows that he can use color with a very kind of delicate hand. Um, Here we have a picture from the Northern Renaissance by Jan van Eyck, the Arnolfini portrait. And I saw immediately when I looked at the picture on the left, the relationship between these two images, because I had just read in Smith's blog that he took many pointers from Northern Renaissance painting in terms of illuminating his pictures. But we also see that he's learned some things about color from those painters as well. The figures are having this kiss, which is kind of the modern equivalent to the hand holding in the Jan van Eyck. And there's a little dog present in the picture. You see there's a cat in the picture that Smith had created. The dog is a symbol of fidelity. The cat means something completely different. The colors of green in the woman's dress symbolizes fertility and growth. You have that color in the background on the Smith picture, and then you have the red, which is a symbol of passion, which is the bedstead on the right and the doorway on the left. And he's even managed to include this round circular mirror in the living room, which was a famous aspect of the Arnolfini portrait. Here we have a very subtle composition that is really a celebration of light and form. The light's coming in through the window on the left-hand side and illuminating the figure who has her arms in this folded position. Her head is downcast. Everything is leading to the book that she's reading. And the color scheme is one of light blue, dark blue, and cream. A very quiet color palette, really beautiful. Smith didn't just use color from that point on. He went back and forth as needed, kind of going by his own artistic compass between color and black and white. Smith liked really delicate, beautiful female models, and he felt that it was best when they were mysterious to him, so that he could imagine them in all these different interesting scenarios. This one is particularly interesting because it shows the model in charge. She's standing on top of this boat with her arms akimbo. It's another kind of pyramidal composition, which is aligned perfectly with the landscape in the background. For male models, Smith liked men who were very athletic and unafraid to do feats of daring do, like this gentleman who's leaping from one building to the next. I think it was because Smith didn't think himself as good looking or athletic, and so he relished or brave. So he relished the models that had these attributes. And you'll notice that this model is slightly out of focus. He seems like a black calligraphic flourish in this very detailed architectural alleyway where you can see all the bumps on the wall. the focus is all the way down this alley rather than on the figure himself. And you'll notice that this figure is suspended in midair for all eternity. He doesn't have a foot on either building. He's right smack in the middle of the leap. The Leap of Faith, as a title for the book, came from Smith's own words. He often talked about the fear of totally letting go, and that he was unable to quite do that. Oftentimes, when he would make pictures, he would come away thinking that he had done a good job, and then later on, when looking at the contact sheets, he would fall apart and say, "There's nothing good here," and his assistant, Patricia Barrett, would have to talk him off the ledge. You've done really great work, and how about printing this one or that one, and we'll see how it looks. So I wish I was around at the time so I could let Rodney know that that he was able to make the leap of faith, that he had basically done it. In an interesting parallel, I had gone to a therapist, and I was talking about how I was having trouble giving lectures without notes all completely written out. And he said, "But you're an expert. You shouldn't need the notes." And I said, "Well, it makes me feel like I'm on a tightrope without a net." And my therapist told me, "But don't you realize you're only a couple of inches off the ground? So that you shouldn't be afraid of doing a lecture without the notes." So I wish I was around to let Smith know that he was only a couple of inches off the ground. This is another really famous picture by Smith, which was made in New York City under the bridge at West 125th Street. It was a difficult shoot to organize because Smith's people had to call for the closure of the road, and also the meticulous arrangement of 30 yellow cabs. That was the only instruction that he received from the artistic director, that it should include yellow cabs. And this works beautifully. The archways seem to set up the two models like a proscenium stage. And there isn't anything about this picture that you could change to make it better. It's just perfect. This picture of Sciorra on the seaplane wing was made in the Dominican Republic in 2010, and it's all about issues of scale and color relationships. This model is particularly petite, so when she walked out on the edge of the wing, she looked tiny, and this great expanse of sea and sand, all these beautiful blues, which work against to set off this kind of peach colored gown that she's wearing. And then we have here some of the later pictures from Smith's career, where we can see relationships to other artists, particularly French artists from the mid-20th century. On the left, we have Read Through a Clock, which reminds me of Cortége's pictures made from the Académie Française. And then on the right, we have Nathan leaping with an umbrella on the rooftop in New York, which reminds me of Henri Cartier-Bresson's pictures that incorporate movement. I wanted to give a shout out to the Staley Wise Gallery, as they're having an excellent show on Smith's work, and they've extended it until November 11th. For anyone that's in New York, I encourage you to stop by and see the actual prints on the wall. There's nothing like seeing them in person. What I thought we would do is just have a few pictures, and I won't comment on them. I'll just run through them slowly so that you can really get the feeling of the image program for this book. And there's a book with a link to the Getty store where you can get 20% off the retail price. I'm using this code GPRSW23, and that will be available until the end of this year.
Paul, thank you so much. Very informative and beautiful images. I'm quickly going to put in the chat, if I can, let me figure out how to do this. Your link that you had, if I can figure out my own typing. I'm going to put it in a chat. I think you can see everything. So if everyone goes to their chat, if they'd like to use that link and that discount code, they can go in there. I have a couple questions for you as well.
Okay.
So the first one is, I know there are several monographs devoted to Smith's work, including The End, which is a limited edition coffee table book, a big coffee table book, 16 by 20-ish inches. What makes your book different than these other books?
Well, we wanted the book to be the retrospective of Smith's work. The other books just pertain to certain parts of his career, so it hasn't gathered together the broader career. And I think this book allows people to really see the trajectory over time, how he developed as an artist from someone who was doing work in the style of Walker Evans, more documentary, to the CEO portraits, and then later into fashion, black and white, and fashion color. Also, the book is of a size that it's easy to carry around, and the price point is much less than that deluxe book, which was retailing for around $900. Our book is $65 retail, and I think that 20% off makes it around 52, something like that. One of the other things is that we really wanted to concentrate on the reproductions, that they had to be of the highest quality.
Excellent. So, and everyone, I will get to your questions as soon as I'm done asking a couple of my own. In addition to your essay, which goes over and reviews Smith's life and career, there are other pieces of writing in the book. Can you tell us just a little bit about those?
Oh, yes, we were very fortunate to have 3 other people contribute. One of them, as I mentioned, was Rebecca Senf. who wrote an essay about the technical aspects and the workings of the studio of Smith. And it serves as a very interesting counterpoint to my essay, which is more lyrical. It's a biocritical essay that covers the trajectory of his whole career. So then after you look at the plate section, you find her essay, which goes more in depth and in a focused way on his studio work and his picture making. Another contributor was Leslie Simolan, who wrote a coda for the book, talking about her personal experience with Smith. And she said something very interesting. She said that he was more interesting than his photographs as a person. He had a vision of how life should be lived and what the world should be like. And he made sure those around him knew it too. No matter who you were, you knew that his expectations would make you peaceful, more romantic, more witty, more human, more interesting, more lasting. This extended to every detail of his life, and he insisted on maintaining the most exacting standards. And then the third person we were able to bring in was Graydon Carter, who for 25 years was the editor of Vanity Fair. And he wrote a short piece. And one of the things that he said that impressed me was, if you look at Rodney Smith's photographs long enough, you begin to realize where his early theological training crept in. There's a sanctity and grace in his pictures, and also faith that binds together all artists, that they know what they are looking for, even when they haven't seen it yet.
That's very nice. I like that. Yeah, wonderful. My last question, and then we'll turn to the group here, is the design of the book and the arrangement of it and the quality. Where did you have the book printed?
We printed it in Italy at Trifolio, which is a printer that's been in existence for about 20 years. And it's a smaller press that tends to work with major museums like the Getty, the Met, MoMA, also university presses like Yale and Princeton. And they really treat bookmaking as an art. We went through, Leslie was on press in Verona, making sure that everything was just right. And to start off, I worked with the production designer at the Getty to select the paper, which is really beautiful. You know, if you touch it, it's like soft as silk. And Leslie had hired her own designer to help us design the book, Jennifer Domer Schutz. And I think she really did an excellent job putting it together. I spent a long time sequencing the plates, making sure that they related to each other and kind of reacted against one another. Sometimes it was a formal consideration. Other times it was that the pictures were so completely different that they needed to be together to make for an interesting experience as you flip through the pages.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn to the Q&A panel here. The first question that we have, which came in as the talk was starting, but you kind of covered a tiny bit of it, but can you discuss the potential influence of Martin Munkaczy and Surrealists on Rodney Smith's work?
Oh, definitely. Munkaczy was one of these key photographers in the history of fashion. And he was the first one to introduce movement into fashion pictures. Before that, it wasn't considered appropriate to have women in fashion pictures moving, which is very strange, but this is in the 1930s, the early 30s. He was Hungarian. He had a background in photojournalism and often photographed races and sports events. So he needed to be able to freeze the action using his small camera. So he eventually was hired by Carmel Snow after she left Vogue magazine and became the editor-in-chief of Harper's. She wanted to shake up the scene. She fired the old photographers and illustrators and hired Munkachi to make pictures. So the leaping picture, the picture of Reed on the rooftop, really resonates with me because I think of the woman who's jumping a puddle by Munkachi. This picture was so famous, it was recreated by Avenon using the model Carmen de l'Orefice in Paris during the 1940s, late 40s, as an homage to the importance of Munkachi's efforts in fashion. Then, of course, we have the surreal, which surrealism was an art movement which came out of the Dada art movement, mainly in France during the 1920s. And it owes a lot of its power to advancements in psychology, the writings of Freud, and dream analysis. So these artists like Salvatore Dali and Giorgio de Chirico, they were interested in what dreamscapes could impart, the psychology of the mind and repressed desires could impart in the artwork. So you can see that occurring in some of the examples that I showed of Smith's work. His use of the bowler hat as a way to de-emphasize the individual. There was a big part of the surrealist scene was this idea of automatic writing and the automaton. So the kind of mechanized or robotic body as a kind of source of nightmares, perhaps, and also a penchant for the absurd was something they were interested in.
Well, thank you. The next question, there is a technical observation, but I'll get to that later. But I'm going to just go on to the questions. Did Smith ever comment on the influence of having a Master's of Divinity?
He always was interested in approaching photography in different ways, and he also taught that to his own students. For instance, he would supply them with a reading list that included books like The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck and poetry. So this program of immersing yourself in literature was very important to Smith. And he did talk about spirituality in his work. I think one of the things that he said that surprised me, he said, photography saved my life. And when I read that comment, I became instantly intrigued. It's like that it helped bring him out of his shell and make him a better person. And I think that was of ultimate importance to Smith, and that he felt like he was being guided by the light and that was God-given.
Okay, here we go on to the next one. What is the most surprising discovery about Rodney as the artist and or his work during your research?
The most surprising. Well, I was surprised when I found out who Rodney Smith was, because I didn't know his name, but I was familiar with the work because during the 90s, it was everywhere. It was in magazines and newspapers and on bus shelters. It was a style that was instantly recognizable as being created by a single author, which is very important. You want to have a brand look. but I never knew who he was until Leslie approached me with this project. And so then it all made sense.
Excellent. Okay, so the last question is, can you discuss the budget and the funding for the project?
Oh, it was different from the normal book project in that I was hired by the estate to assist them with the book. And so I was paid by the estate to undertake it. And then when we needed a publisher, we were batting around different ideas. And I thought, well, this sounds like it would be a good publication for the Getty. So then the Getty process took over. I proposed it. And in order to do that, I had to write a proposal that included 10 pages of information about the book, all its parts, how long it was, what its goals were, who the audience was. And then the Department of Publications at the Getty puts it through various committees and also does a budgeting segment, so they can figure out how to price the book and how many books would be made based on their comparable sales figures that they look at. So I don't really pay attention to those details because I have my hands full and that's not really my job. But one of the things that was key was for me was to have a reasonable price point that people could afford to buy the book and enjoy it. I really don't like the idea of, reaching out to a very small audience. If you do your PhD on some esoteric subject and 4 people read your paper, I think it's kind of sad. So I'm hoping that this book will really sell well and people will enjoy it and keep it on their coffee table.
Excellent. Well, I think that's it for our questions, unless anyone else has something to ask. Paul, thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone, someone asked where the show was in New York, and it's at Staley Wise Gallery in New York.
Yes.
And in the chat, again, there's a link to the discount code if you want to purchase the book from the publisher. Someone asked, will there be a way to access the Zoom call later? Yes, again, AIPAD.com, the AIPAD website, full of amazing things on there, including details about the photography show that will be April 24th in New York. There's a section with media. It's called the media button. And on that media button, you can click on it and you can see all of our previous AIPAD talks. And this one will be up there shortly. I don't know if it will be today, but it will be up there very soon. So you can access that. I'll just say one more thing. Our next AIPAD talk will be November 30th. It's going to be a great talk with James Oles, who's curating a show in Mexico called Mexichrome, and it's going to be a walkthrough of that show. So we hope you all join us then. But Paul, thank you so much for spending the time, taking the time. It was wonderful, lovely to learn more about Rodney Smith, and we really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm happy for people to look at the Zoom webinar, as long as I don't have to rewatch it.
I feel the same way.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Paul. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.